London, 1875. The weight of the Paxton family crest hung heavy on Lord Clarence Paxton's shoulders as he stared out the window of his study. Rain pelted against the glass, mirroring the storm of thoughts whirling through his mind. Tomorrow would be his wedding day, a union that would save his family from financial ruin, preserve his ancestral home, and fulfill the duty he had been raised to uphold. Yet something had shifted in him these past weeks, something that made his perfectly arranged future seem less like salvation and more like a gilded cage. "Your Grace," his valet said from the doorway. "Lord Merryweather has arrived." Clarence nodded, straightening his posture as his oldest friend entered the study. James Merryweather had known him since their days at Eton, before Clarence had inherited the dukedom, before duty had consumed every waking moment of his existence. "Celebrating your final night of freedom with that sour expression," James teased, helping himself to the brandy decanter. "Most men would be jubilant to wed a woman as beautiful and wealthy as Lady Adelaide Thornton. Most men aren't marrying to save their family from debts accrued by 3 generations of dukes with gambling habits," Clarence replied dryly. "Besides, Lady Adelaide understands our arrangement. She gains a title, and I gain her dowry. It's a sensible union." James studied him over the rim of his glass. "And what of Miss Maynard? Your name hasn't been linked with hers in the society papers for weeks. Quite the change after you two were practically inseparable all season." Clarence's jaw tightened. "Katherine Maynard is a distraction I can ill afford. She lacks the connections and fortune I require in a wife." The words tasted like ashes in his mouth. "Besides, she's returned to her family's country estate. I imagine she's quite content there, far from London society and its disappointments." "If you believe that, you're a greater fool than I thought," James said, setting his glass down with more force than necessary. "You forget I saw you together at the Harrington ball. I saw how you looked at her." "It doesn't matter how I looked at her," Clarence snapped. "The Paxton legacy stretches back 500 years. Am I to be the duke who allows it all to crumble because I fancied myself in love with a gentleman's daughter of modest means?" "At least admit you love her," James pressed. "To what end? Tomorrow I wed Lady Adelaide. The contracts are signed, the cathedral decorated, half of London's aristocracy will be in attendance. There is no other path forward." The clock on the mantel chimed 9, and James shook his head sadly. "For a man of such intelligence, you can be remarkably blind." He placed a small envelope on the desk. "Your butler asked me to deliver this. Apparently, it arrived after you'd given orders not to be disturbed." Clarence picked up the envelope, his heart stuttering when he recognized the handwriting. "Katherine, I'll leave you to it," James said quietly, moving toward the door. "But Clarence, being a good duke doesn't mean you must be a miserable man." After James departed, Clarence stared at the envelope for long minutes. Every instinct told him to throw it into the fire unread. Whatever Katherine had written could only make tomorrow more difficult, yet his fingers betrayed him, breaking the seal before his mind could stop them. The letter was brief. "My dearest Clarence, by the time you read this, I shall be far from London, having decided that a heart can only break so many times before it ceases to mend. I write not to dissuade you from your chosen path, but to unburden myself of a secret I've carried these past weeks. I've debated the morality of telling you, especially on the eve of your wedding, but I cannot let you proceed without knowing the truth. Lady Adelaide is not what she seems. Her fortune, the very reason for your marriage, does not exist. Her father lost everything in a series of failed investments in the Americas. The Thorntons are as destitute as they claim your family will be without this union. I learned this from my cousin, who works in the banking house that holds their accounts. Adelaide means to secure your title before the truth of her family's finances becomes common knowledge. I tell you this not out of spite or jealousy, but because you deserve to enter this union with your eyes open to the truth. My heart remains yours, though I release you from any obligation that knowledge might impose. With deepest affection, Katherine. Clarence read the letter 3 times, his mind refusing to accept its implications. If Katherine was right, and he had no reason to doubt her integrity, then tomorrow he would bind himself to a woman who had deceived him and receive nothing in return to save his family's estate. But beyond the shock of Adelaide's deception lay a more profound realization. Katherine had cared enough to warn him, even knowing it would change nothing between them. She had put his welfare above her own feelings, a selflessness he had not shown her. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been willing to sacrifice his happiness for duty, but in the process, he had sacrificed Catherine's happiness as well. And now it appeared his sacrifice would be for nothing. "Jenkins," he called for his butler, "have the carriage brought round immediately." Rain continued to lash against the windows as Clarence's carriage rattled through London streets toward the Thornton residence. Puddles reflected gaslight in shimmering pools as they passed, and thunder rolled overhead, a fitting backdrop to the storm of his thoughts. The Thornton butler appeared startled when Clarence arrived unannounced, but quickly ushered him into the drawing-room where Lord and Lady Thornton sat with their daughter. "Your Grace," Lord Thornton rose, his expression guarded. "This is unexpected." "I apologize for the late hour," Clarence said, his voice deceptively calm. "But a matter has come to my attention that cannot wait until morning." Adelaide looked up from her embroidery, her face a perfect mask of innocence. "Surely nothing that would bring you out on such a dreadful night." "Indeed something would," Clarence replied, withdrawing Catherine's letter from his pocket. "I've received information suggesting that your family's financial situation is not as you represented." The colour drained from Lord Thornton's face, while Lady Thornton's hand flew to her throat. Only Adelaide maintained her composure, setting aside her needlework with deliberate care. "And you believe this information?" she asked coolly. "I have no reason to doubt its source." "No reason except that you're engaged to me, not to whoever whispered this slander in your ear." Adelaide's eyes hardened. "I can guess the source. That country nobody you were so infatuated with before you came to your senses. Katherine Maynard has more integrity in her little finger than you have demonstrated in our entire acquaintance," Clarence said, his voice sharp. "Is it true? Are you destitute?" Lord Thornton collapsed back into his chair. "Not destitute, Your Grace. We have encountered temporary difficulties. The investments will recover in time." "Which you did not have, so you sought to solve your problems by deceiving me." Clarence felt oddly calm now that the truth was confirmed. "The marriage contract specifically outlined your daughter's dowry, a dowry that, it appears, does not exist. By the time the investments mature, you would have been legally bound to a family built on lies," Clarence finished. "I think not." Adelaide rose, her composure finally cracking. "You cannot break our engagement. The invitations have gone out. The society papers will cover the wedding. We'll be ruined if you cry off." "You ruined yourselves the moment you decided to deceive me," Clarence replied. "The engagement is over. I'll have my solicitor draw up the formal dissolution in the morning." "But what of your family's debts?" Lord Thornton asked desperately. "You need this marriage as much as we do." "I'll find another way." Clarence turned to leave, then paused. "I suggest you prepare yourselves for some uncomfortable questions. The truth has a way of emerging, especially in London society." As he stepped back into the rain, Clarence felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had chosen duty over love, believing it the only path to save his family. Now he was free of an ill-fated union, but still faced with the problem of his family's mounting debts. And Katherine, if her letter was true, she had left London. Where would she go? Her family's modest estate in Derbyshire, most likely. The question now was whether he had any right to follow her after he had dismissed her so callously. The clock on his mantelpiece showed midnight when Clarence finally returned home. He summoned his butler and valet, giving a series of rapid instructions that left both men wide-eyed. "You wish to depart for Derbyshire tonight, Your Grace?" Jenkins asked, clearly wondering if his master had taken leave of his senses. "At first light," Clarence confirmed, "and send a message to Mr. Harrison. I need to see my solicitor before I leave London." "But the wedding, sir?" "There will be no wedding. See that messages are sent to the cathedral and to our guests. I know it's an enormous scandal, but it cannot be helped." His valet hesitated. "And what reason shall we give for the cancellation, Your Grace?" Clarence considered the question. "The truth, Richards. Simply say that the Duke of Westmoreland has recognized he was about to make the greatest mistake of his life." The journey to Derbyshire took the better part of a day, even with Clarence changing horses at every post. The rain had given way to watery sunshine by the time his carriage rolled through the gates of Thornfield Manor, the Maynard family home. His arrival caused a stir among the servants, and he was shown to a modest but elegant drawing-room where Mr. Maynard, a gentleman of about 60 with kind eyes and a scholarly demeanour, received him with evident surprise. "Your Grace," he said, bowing, "this is an unexpected honour. I had thought you would be otherwise engaged today." "There has been a change of plans," Clarence said, removing his gloves. "I've come to speak with your daughter, if she'll receive me." Mr. Maynard studied him for a long moment. "My daughter has suffered enough at the hands of London society, I think. Why should I allow you to cause her further pain?" The question was blunt, but Clarence appreciated the man's directness. "Because I've been a fool, sir. Because your daughter showed me a truth I was too blind to see myself. And because I love her, though I've done a poor job of demonstrating it." The older man's expression softened slightly. "She's in the garden. Follow the path past the rose arbor to the small pond. She often goes there when she needs solitude." Clarence nodded gratefully and made his way through the gardens. They were nothing like the manicured grandeur of his own estate, but there was a wild beauty to the place that reminded him of Katherine, untamed, genuine, without pretense. He found her seated on a stone bench beside the pond, a book open on her lap, though her gaze was fixed on the water. She wore a simple day dress of pale blue, her chestnut hair caught in a loose knot at the nape of her neck. Sunlight danced across the surface of the pond, casting dappled shadows across her face. For a moment, he simply watched her, his heart aching with a love he'd tried so hard to deny. Then she sensed his presence and looked up, her green eyes widening in shock. "Clarence," she whispered, rising so quickly her book tumbled to the ground. "What are you doing here?" "Today is your wedding day." "No," he said simply, closing the distance between them. "It isn't." Katherine stared at him in confusion, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't understand." "I received your letter." He withdrew it from his pocket, the paper now worn at the creases from repeated reading. "You were right about everything. The Thorntons, their finances, all of it. You broke the engagement because of my letter." Horror crossed her face. "That wasn't my intention. I only wanted—" "I know what you intended," he said gently. "You wanted me to enter my marriage with full knowledge of the circumstances. It was selfless and brave, and it made me realize how much I had taken your character for granted." She shook her head, taking a step back. "You shouldn't be here. Whatever your reasons for ending your engagement, it has nothing to do with me. You made your feelings quite clear when we last spoke in London." The memory of their last conversation made him wince. He had been cold, dismissive of her feelings, insistent that duty must trump any personal considerations. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About so many things. I told myself I was choosing duty over love because I had responsibilities that transcended personal happiness. The truth is, I was afraid." "Afraid?" Katherine looked genuinely puzzled. "What could you possibly fear? You're a duke, you have everything." "I feared loving someone who saw me, truly saw me, not as the Duke of Westmoreland, but as Clarence. A man with doubts and flaws and dreams." He took a step closer to her. I feared that if I admitted how much I loved you, I would be placing my happiness in someone else's hands. And after watching my father destroy our family's fortune and my mother's heart with his recklessness, I swore I would never be so vulnerable. Catherine's expression softened, though wariness remained in her eyes. So what changed? Your letter showed me that you put my welfare above your own feelings, even after I hurt you. It made me realize that love isn't a weakness, it's the greatest strength we can possess. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. I spent my life believing that being the perfect duke meant sacrificing my own happiness. But what kind of legacy is that to uphold? What good is preserving the Paxton name if I'm miserable in the process? But your family's debts will be addressed, he said firmly. This morning, before I left London, I met with my solicitor. I'm selling 2 of our lesser properties and a collection of artwork my grandfather acquired. It won't solve everything, but it buys us time to put the estate on sounder financial footing. Us, Catherine whispered, her eyes searching his. If you'll have me, Clarence said, his voice rough with emotion. Catherine, I know I have no right to ask after the way I treated you, but I love you. I've loved you since you challenged my opinion of that dreadful play at the Harrington's soiree and made me laugh for the first time in years. I've loved you through every conversation, every dance, every moment in your company, and I've been miserable without you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held herself carefully still. How do I know you won't change your mind again when some new duty calls? I couldn't bear it, Clarence. Because I've learned that loving you isn't contrary to my duty, it's essential to it. How can I be the man my title demands if I deny the very thing that makes me whole? He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. Katherine Maynard, will you make me the happiest of men and consent to be my wife? Not for connections or fortune, but because I love you beyond reason and cannot imagine my life without you in it. For one terrible moment, she was silent, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then slowly, beautifully, she smiled. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Clarence Paxton, though you are the most infuriating man I've ever known. He rose and pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he murmured. There will be quite the scandal in London when word gets out that I jilted one bride only to propose to another the very next day. Catherine laughed, the sound warming him to his core. I've never cared much for London society's opinion. Besides, scandals fade. What remains is what matters. And what remains, my love? Us, she said simply. You and me and whatever life we build together. As the afternoon sun gilded the garden around them, Clarence knew with bone-deep certainty that he had made the right choice. Duty would always be part of his life, but love, Catherine's love, would make that duty not a burden but a privilege to bear. 2 months later, the Duke and Duchess of Westmoreland stood receiving guests in the grand ballroom of Paxton House. The Tun had indeed buzzed with gossip about their whirlwind courtship and marriage, but the scandal had largely subsided in favor of newer, more salacious tales. You look radiant, Clarence whispered to his wife as they greeted Lord and Lady Harrington. Catherine's eyes sparkled up at him. And you look surprisingly content for a man who claimed to despise these social functions. Everything is bearable with you at my side, he replied, bringing her gloved hand to his lips. James Merriweather approached them, grinning broadly. Your Grace, he said, bowing to Catherine, marriage suits you. I've never seen Clarence smile so much in all our years of friendship. It suits us both, she replied warmly, though I'm still teaching him that there are times when duty can wait if there are more pressing matters at hand. More pressing matters? James raised an eyebrow. Clarence laughed, drawing Catherine closer to his side. My wife believes that watching the sunset from our favorite spot in the garden takes precedence over reviewing estate accounts. A year ago, I would have considered such a notion absurd. And now, James asked, now I understand that some duties, like making my wife happy, are far more important than balancing ledgers. Clarence's gaze softened as he looked at Catherine. She's teaching me that life isn't meant to be endured in pursuit of some abstract legacy. It's meant to be lived and loved in each moment we're given. Later that night, as they stood alone on the balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens, Catherine leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. Do you ever regret it, breaking your engagement to Lady Adelaide? She and her family left for the continent in disgrace, you know. Not for a moment, Clarence said firmly. Though I do regret the years I spent believing that love and duty were opposing forces in my life. They can be, Catherine mused, but they don't have to be. A lesson I learned from one remarkable letter, he said, turning to cup her face in his hands. One letter that arrived at precisely the right moment to save me from a lifetime of regret. I almost didn't send it, she confessed. I was afraid you'd think I was being spiteful. Instead, you freed me. He brushed his lips across her forehead. Not just from a disastrous marriage, but from the prison I'd built for myself. A prison of duty without love. Catherine smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. And now? Now I understand that the greatest duty I have is to honor the love we share, Clarence said, drawing her into his arms. Everything else, the title, the estate, the responsibilities, they're meaningless without you to share them. As he kissed her under the vast canopy of stars, Clarence Paxton, Duke of Westmoreland, knew that he had finally discovered the truth his ancestors had never understood. Duty without love was merely obligation, but duty inspired by love became purpose. And in Catherine, he had found both his greatest love and his truest purpose. The legacy he would leave would not be measured in lands preserved or fortunes maintained, but in the life they built together, a life where duty and love walked hand in hand toward a future brighter than either could have imagined alone.